The wide receiver injuries are so bad right now that my league mates are actually making panic trades just so they have someone to start this week. Hopefully you're not that bad off, but if you are, here's some wide receiver rankings for you. S tier, no questions about these guys. JSN, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Justin Jefferson. JSN and St. Brown have been much better than Jefferson so far this year. I'm going to continue to give him the benefit of the doubt, though. If you look at Jefferson, you go back to 2024, he averaged 18.5 points per game. 2023, he averaged 20. And 2022, he averaged 21. It does seem like Carson Wentz is going to be the starting quarterback for the Minnesota Vikings this week. And Wentz had been better for Jefferson so far this year than McCarthy has been. But it is a surprise that McCarthy's not good to go coming out of the bye. At least I thought he would be. Now, moving over to A tier, CeeDee Lamb has already been ruled good to go. He is playing this week as of Wednesday. And because they're telling us on Wednesday that he's going to be playing, I'm going to assume that we have no limitations and I'm just going to be jamming him in. This game against the Washington Commanders currently has the highest over-under of any game that we have seen so far this year. You actually have the Commanders favored in this game, but still the Dallas Cowboys have an implied team total of 26 points. So the expectations are this is a massive shootout. Now, Drake London will be our next name. London's been much better throughout really his entire NFL career in games that you've had no Darnell Mooney. And we see that this past week against the Buffalo Bills, where he has 16 targets out of 32 Michael Penix dropbacks. Absolutely insane. A 50% team target share is almost unheard of, but he's close to averaging that so far this year. So London, incredibly strong option. I will say, obviously, it's better if you're in a spot with no Mooney than Mooney plays. Davante Adams is going to be higher in my rankings this week than he's been all season. He's actually only averaging 19 points per game. This matchup against the Jacksonville Jaguars is one in which the Rams are favored and you have no Puka Nacua in it. So realistically, we've seen this be the most concentrated offense in the NFL, where really the only players that touch the ball are Puka, Kyron, and Adams, and you remove the top option out of that trio. Rome Odunze is difficult to rank this week. I understand that in week 6 against Washington, he was very disappointing, but it was mainly because a touchdown got called back. If they would have given him that touchdown, he would have been with 5 straight games scoring. And realistically, DJ Moore looks like he may not play this one. And if DJ Moore does miss, Rome could move up these ranks and more plays. Rome will fall, but regardless, he'll be an A tier or a B tier wide receiver, so you start him regardless. Jamar Chase, don't love the matchup against the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Steelers here are actually favored by 5.5 points in this game. You have an implied team total of 19.5 points against Pittsburgh at home on Thursday night for Cincy. So sportsbooks are still telling us that Flacco's not going to come in and save this Cincinnati Bengals offense. But I mean, we've ranked Jamar Chase about in this range since we've had the Joe Burrow injury. I understand back right after the Burrow injury, where you had Jamar Chase score 8.9 points and then 7.3 points. You had people screaming at me, losing their minds that he was too high in these rankings. Now people may be crying that he's too low. But if you think that he's too low here, you can by all means go take the higher than 72.5 receiving yards on Underdog Fantasy for Jamar Chase on Thursday night. They actually have Jamar Chase higher, lower 72.5 receiving yards in comparison to Jaylen Warren, who's currently sitting at higher, lower about 73.5 total yards. The link to Underdog Fantasy is in the description comment section, available in almost every single state. And if you sign up with code FLOCK after you play your first $5, you are going to get $100 added into your account. And on top of that, you'll get a free Jaylen Warren pick, higher, lower, half a total yard for the game on Thursday night. And you'll get free questions that you can ask me in the live streams. And I'm live streaming every single day until Christmas to answer your free questions. Now, let's move over to Nico Collins. With Nico, he's been very disappointing so far this year, only averaging 14 points per game. He's the wide receiver 18 in points per game, but realistically he's still been leading this team in targets, the same exact target share from last season at 24.8%. And you go back to the 2 years prior, he was averaging about 17.5 points per game. So I think it's just been a small sample struggle with Nico. Don't love the matchup against Seattle, where you currently do have the Houston Texans projected only to score about 19.5 points. Now, our last wide receiver in A tier is going to be George Pickens. George Pickens is the wide receiver 4 in points per game this year. If y'all remember, we actually had George Pickens as a top 10 wide receiver in our rest of season rankings the second that CeeDee Lamb went down with an injury, because it was very easy to project out, oh, okay, no Lamb, worst defense in the league. They're going to have to throw the ball with an efficient quarterback. George Pickens is about to be a top 5 wide receiver during this stretch. Well, now that Lamb's back, I still do believe that Lamb is going to be the wide receiver 1 here. So the target should come down for Pickens, where over the past 5 games, he is sitting averaging about 9 targets per contest. But still, he's a must-start wide receiver in a game that should be the highest scoring game of the week. Now, leading off B tier, we are going to have Rashee Rice. Now, maybe I am a fish. Maybe I have no idea what the hell I am talking about. But I saw on Underdog, they have Rashee Rice higher, lower, 48.5 receiving yards. And this seems like the lock of the year. Rashee Rice higher than 48 receiving yards is what I'm going with. If you go through and you look at what Rashee Rice had done in 2024 when fully healthy, he had 103 receiving yards week 1, 75 receiving yards week 2, 110 receiving yards in week 3. You go over to the end of 2023, he was going out with 107, 64, 72, 91, 57, and 127. So for me, we've seen him have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 games straight when healthy. He goes higher than 48.5 receiving yards. Like, I think he's an auto start the first week back in. I think this is the best pick'em that I've seen on Underdog literally all season. And yeah, I'm not hesitating at all to start him. Spread on this game is massive. So maybe, just maybe, you're concerned that the Kansas City Chiefs just run the ball over and over and over again. Now, looking at Jalen Waddle, the implied team total here is only 19 points for the Miami Dolphins. We actually have trade rumors surrounding Jalen Waddle at this point, where there's an outside chance that he is getting sent out of Miami. This looks to be an absolute dumpster fire. The Cleveland Browns are favored in this game. But with all that being said, he's the wide receiver 16 in points per game so far this year. In the 2 games that you've had with no Tyreek, he has scored 16 and 23, and he's had back-to-back games with 8 or more targets. Now, Deebo Samuel was very disappointing this past week against the Chicago Bears, only scoring 5.5 fantasy points, but he's still the wide receiver 13 in points per game. And this is about the best matchup you could ask for going up against the Dallas Cowboys, where right now you do have an implied team total of 28.5 points. And we don't know if Terry McLaurin is going to be healthy or not, but Deebo himself clearly is banged up with a heel, and that's going to be something to monitor. Now, with Brian Thomas, I understand, yes, he had a phenomenal week this past week with the season high 23 fantasy points. But ultimately, he's still only averaging 11.8 points per game. He's the wide receiver 34 in points per game. I'm going to be honest with you, he was initially lower in my rankings before we checked out the projections. I saw that he was higher, lower, 68.5 receiving yards on Underdog. And obviously, I'm not just listening to these projections one for one. As you can tell, Rice is projected for 20 fewer yards, yet I still have Rashee Rice ranked ahead of him. But it is a fine spot going up against the Rams, where they do project to have to throw the ball. Now, DK Metcalf is the wide receiver 1 on my own fantasy team. Again, if we look at the targets per game, he's only sitting at 6.2, which is a career low, yet he is averaging 0.8 touchdowns per game, which is a career high. So realistically, this kind of touchdown rate, it's going to come back down to earth. And DK Metcalf is a wide receiver that I wouldn't mind selling for the right price. But this week in particular, where you get to go up against an absolute garbage Cincinnati Bengals defense, this is not the time to be benching Metcalf. This is not the time to be selling Metcalf. Metcalf is a jam because of the matchup. Now, moving over to Tetairoa McMillan, he is averaging 12.8 fantasy points per game. The targets per game have been very compelling. He's averaging 8. Obviously, he finally finds the end zone this past week in a really good matchup against the Dallas Cowboys. This matchup against the Jets is one in which the Panthers are probably going to be able to run the ball over and over and over again, as they are favored over New York. And clearly, we've seen Carolina lean on the run heavily. And then Courtland Sutton will be the last wide receiver in this tier. I understand Sutton gives you the dud this past week against the Jets. I mean, this Denver Broncos team looked completely useless. it was an overseas game. I don't want to take too much away from this. You currently do have the Denver Broncos favored by over a touchdown against the New York Giants. And realistically, Courtland Sutton is still the wide receiver 20 in points per game. Now, moving over to Chris Olave. Chris Olave is having a lot of trade rumors circling around him in New Orleans. It would make a lot of sense for them to ship off Olave, considering the fact they're not playing for anything at the moment. And with Chris Olave, I don't know, the target floor is just so consistent. Where he is sitting here so far this season, actually averaging almost 11 targets a game with a target share of almost 33%. Now, Quentin Johnston was at practice on Wednesday, and now selfishly, y'all know, I mean, I bet my entire season on Quentin Johnston being drafted as the wide receiver 73 in Underdog best ball drafts. So I am rooting for him to play. I need him back ASAP. He's the wide receiver 8 in points per game. Do I think that's going to hold up through the rest of the year? Probably not. But this matchup against the Indianapolis Colts is one in which the Chargers project to actually be able to score the ball, and they have an implied team total of 25 points. Now, A.J. Brown will be our next name. Don't like the matchup for A.J. Brown going up against the Minnesota Vikings. What's hilarious is I know if you look at the box score, it doesn't speak to the full extent of the A.J. Brown utilization in this offense because a lot of these targets are just garbage throwaways, right? But regardless, A.J. Brown has had 5 straight games with 8 or more targets. Like, A.J. Brown is getting targeted heavily in this offense, regardless of if the Philadelphia Eagles are up, if they are down. He had 14 points this past week. He gave you 6 receptions, 80 receiving yards. The spread on this game is extremely close. I want to give A.J. Brown the benefit of the doubt, but we are now in week 7, and the dude's the wide receiver 43 in points per game. Now, Michael Pittman Jr. will be our next name. Pittman could easily move up these rankings. It's going to be an environment in which the Indianapolis Colts are actually dogs, so they're probably going to have to throw the ball here. But you currently have Josh Downs in the concussion protocol. Downs did miss Wednesday practice. It will be very important to see if he is able to practice on Thursday or Friday. But Pittman probably has earned him spot as a start regardless. The concern that I will have, though, is the fact that you do have him with a very unsustainable touchdown rate, very similar to DK Metcalf. Looking at the underlying target share, it's not great. Now, Ladd McConkey was great this past week. Also, this past week, you had no Quentin Johnston. Also, Ladd McConkey, still on the season, is the wide receiver 33 in points per game. So I understand that this is a player that maybe the talent's better than the production's been so far this year, and you have a lot of upside, especially in a game in which the Chargers, we want to say, are going to have to throw the ball. But Quentin Johnston's clearly been the wide receiver 1 when they've both been healthy. Now, Keenan Allen will be our next name. With Keenan Allen, you're getting the consistent targets. You don't have the same big play appeal that you have with Ladd or QJ, which is why I'm going to rank him as the wide receiver 3 here. But I do believe this should be a very good offense, while at the same time, I would imagine that they lean a little bit more pass happy given the injuries that they have to their running backs. Then Xavier Worthy will be our last wide receiver in C tier. Right now, you do have the Kansas City Chiefs up there projected to be one of the highest scoring offenses in the league with an implied team total of 28.5 points. But the spread in this game is, I want to say, the largest on the week of about 11.5. So realistically, you should see the Chiefs actually be able to run the ball here consistently, but we'll see. Then going over to D tier, the wide receiver 2 that's in my lineup right now. So I really hope that I am ranking him too low. He was on a sell high video for us last week. I tried to sell him high in my own league. Was Stephon Diggs. Diggs, he only had 3 targets this past week. Kayshon Boutte dominated against the New Orleans Saints in a game in which Drake May looked phenomenal. So realistically, there are strong reasons to be concerned. But if you look at weeks 4 and 5, he had over 100 receiving yards in both contests. And I would still assume, based off the level of team investment into him and the large sample that we have, Diggs is probably the wide receiver 1 here over Kayshon Boutte. We'll talk about Boutte later on. Devonta Smith will be our next name. Smith isn't too far off from A.J. Brown in terms of points per game. Like, Smith is actually averaging 11.2 in comparison to A.J. Brown at 9.7. I mean, they're right there next to each other. But the difference is, 1, with A.J. Brown, we have a much larger sample of him being the established wide receiver 1. And 2, with this as well, you actually do have A.J. Brown seeing more targets. Again, I understand that not all targets are created equal, blah, blah, blah. But I'm still going to believe that A.J. Brown is the wide receiver one in this offense. But for my underdog basketball teams, I hope I'm wrong. Then Jordan Addison will be our next option. If we are looking at Addison, he's the wide receiver 14 in points per game, but it's been only like 1.5 games that he's played. Both of them have been in Europe, so I don't want to take too much away from Addison's production, especially when it's only come off of 9 total receptions. And again, if we're not that excited about Jefferson, given the quarterback play here, I don't know how we can be super excited about Addison. Now, we've gotten the reports that Terry McLaurin's going to be back at practice this week. Now, does that mean that Terry McLaurin's going to be playing? I don't know. If Terry McLaurin does play, he probably is somebody you got to put in your starting lineup, just given the fact the matchup is so damn good against the Dallas Cowboys. I would have a hard time ranking him much higher than where he's at right now in these rankings, just because, again, we really don't have any clarity whatsoever about his role this week. Now, with Kendrick Bourne, there's a little bit up in the air. One, Juwan Jennings apparently is playing with 42 broken ribs and 3 broken ankles. But also, Ricky Pearsall's not going to be playing in this game. We've had back-to-back games from Kendrick Bourne with 142 receiving yards. Now, you are playing against the Atlanta Falcons, where you have an implied team total of 25 points. Then going over to T. Higgins, I am putting him on my bench myself. Again, I have a couple of running backs that I can throw in my flexes. I would hope that you could bench T. Higgins. With Flacco, it would be nice if he comes in and elevates the offense. You've had back-to-back games with 11.2 fantasy points from Higgins, but he's played 6 games so far this season. And the best game that we've had is him sitting with 14.5 points. And he's had 1 game with more than 3 receptions. Like, I'm not excited about it. He's higher, lower, 47.5 receiving yards on Underdog, which is crazy. It blows my mind that he is 1 yard off of Rashee Rice in the projections. Then Jamison Williams will be our next name. Jamison Williams is the wide receiver 46 in points per game. We talked about him being an interesting start last week against the Kansas City Chiefs, just because the over-under of that game was incredibly high. But also the over-under of this game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers is incredibly high at 52.5 points. So maybe you think they have to go out there. Maybe you think they have to throw the ball with aggression. But reality is they're favored so heavily that I wouldn't be surprised if they can just run it over and over. Wan'Dale Robinson will be our next name. With Wan'Dale, my holdup is you currently have the New York Giants against the Denver Broncos, projected to be the worst offense in the league this week. Now, obviously, this is a corner matchup that you really want to avoid. I will say that most opposing defenses probably aren't going to view Wan'Dale as the traditional wide receiver one for the New York Giants, so maybe that benefits him. Maybe he doesn't draw the tough matchup. But with Wan'Dale, I just don't see the touchdown upside being crazy, even if he has scored 2 touchdowns so far this year. I mean, his career high in touchdowns, and we're in year 4, is 3. Now, Jacoby Myers is playing against the Kansas City Chiefs. Tougher matchup in general. Implied team total of only 17 points for this offense. Again, I think they are the biggest dogs of any game this week. And you have a ton of trade rumors surrounding Jacoby. So it seems like you probably won't have Brock Bowers. And I've overrated Jacoby Myers with no Brock Bowers for a long time now, because he's had 4 straight games with under 10 fantasy points. Then our next 2 wide receivers will be the pair of options in Green Bay. You have Matthew Golden and Romeo Doubs. Romeo Doubs is actually the wide receiver 25 in points per game so far this year. Obviously, a lot of this is just coming off of what he's been able to do as a touchdown scorer, because the targets per game is 5.6, which is the same exact mark that you had in 2024 and 2023, but he's averaging 0.8 touchdowns per game at the moment, which is just allowing him to be artificially boosted up. But he is a good red zone threat, so I mean, I would be my bet to score a touchdown across all the wide receivers in Green Bay. Issue is they just spread the ball out too much. Now, going over to E tier, I personally have Jerry Jeudy on my bench. I don't know why I'm still rostering this guy. He's the wide receiver 61 in points per game. He is doing the least with the most. It is incredible, but Jerry Jeudy is currently averaging less than 1 yard per route run. That's true. He's averaging 0.97 yards per route. I can't even comprehend that. So even though he has 8 targets a game, he's just doing nothing with them. The offense is favored here over Miami. It's not like Miami is any good, and you have no David Njoku though. So I'm not cutting Jerry Jeudy, and I do have him as wide receiver 36 here, but he's been horrendous. Shaheed's been the wide receiver 36 in points per game so far this year. You would say that Shaheed maybe is a very interesting pickup, especially if Olave gets dealt. But the thing with Shaheed is the last time he had more than 6 targets in a game was week 1. So you really are just kind of like a boom bust option in one of the league's worst offenses. DJ Moore is the wide receiver 49 in points per game, and he is injured coming into this. So we really don't know the full extent of what we're going to get with Moore, but DJ Moore has not had a single game with more than 6 targets this year. Juwan Jennings, like I said, he is currently playing with 47 broken ribs and 3 broken ankles. So it's very difficult to look at a large sample of what you had going back to 2024. But realistically, this past week, he scored 1.7 points against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Clearly not fully healthy. Trey Tucker has had back-to-back games with double-digit fantasy points. Like, realistically, the overall target volume's not that bad either. He's averaging almost 60 receiving yards per game and 5.5 targets. And you have no Brock Bowers. So realistically, I probably need to move Trey Tucker up these rankings. Then Cooper Kupp will be our last name in this tier. Kupp isn't super exciting. I don't know why I'm still ranking him this high. He had 3 targets this past week. He had 9 targets the week prior. I guess back-to-back games with double-digit fantasy points. The issue is he looks like he's just lost all juice. This is the first time in his career that we've seen him under 1.9 yards per route. Now let's move over to F tier. Hollywood Brown looked great this past week, but now you have Rashee Rice coming in, and Hollywood Brown looking great this past week with multiple receiving touchdowns was off of 4 targets. So it's not like he's doing so with volume. Alec Ayomanor is currently averaging 8.1 points per game. He's the wide receiver 60, but you have the coaching staff change, and at the same time, you should have no Calvin Ridley in this game either. Kayshon Boutte, I understand, gives you the massive blow up this past week against the New Orleans Saints. But Kayshon Boutte so far this year is averaging 3.8 targets per game. So he's a super boom bust option. I do still think that Stephon Diggs is the wide receiver 1. Josh Downs is currently the wide receiver 53 on the year, while at the same time, you actually have him in concussion protocol at the moment, so we don't even know if he's going to play. Sterling Shepard and Tez Johnson can kind of go back to back. I had to message the devs on flockfantasy.com telling them like, hey, we got to get Tez Johnson out here. The reality is I have no idea which of the Bucs wide receivers you would want to get in your lineup. So I would be scared to tell you to play either guy. Travis Hunter is yet to have a game where he's scored more than 10 points. Like, he's been very, very bad. The efficiency is even bad. 1.2 yards per route run, a 15% team target share. Jalen Coker is going to be playing his first game this week. I know a lot of people are excited about Jalen Coker, but realistically, you're the number 2 option for Bryce Young. Christian Kirk's the wide receiver 70 on the season. And then Troy Franklin's the wide receiver 50. Like, I would say realistically, the only guys that I would ever even really consider putting in my lineup this week are D tier or higher. Let me know in the comment section if you have to play any of these bums, but I think that's all I got for you. Again, the lock of the century is on Underdog right now. Rashee Rice, higher than 48.5 receiving yards. You can find that link in the description as well as the comment section. If you're not already on Underdog, after you play your first $5, you're going to get $100 added to your account, and you'll get a free Jalen Warren pick, higher or lower half a total yard, and you'll get free questions to ask me in the live streams that I'm live streaming every single day until Christmas, answering your free questions. And on top of that, Underdog is at the very top of the App Store for 3 reasons. 1, they're an incredible app. 2, they're available in almost every single state. And 3, the promos are ridiculous at the moment. But I really appreciate you and really